Hello everyone, it's Monday, May 23rd, and I am heading into the office. It's about 9:15, so running a little late again, but I have been very much thinking about my current project, which I thought I'd, log here on YouTube, sanitizing it as I go, usually naming as little about specifics as I can and dealing with the generalities that I think are still quite interesting. So I am connecting to a database, pulling some data. I'm processing that data, combining it with data pulled from various APIs like Google Webmaster Tools Search Console, and I guess to a lesser degree, Google Analytics. So 3 data sources I'm touching, knitting it together locally, storing it as a CSV file, which I figured would be the perfect, ideal way to make an interchangeable data format, because I mean, who doesn't read CSV files? Now the trick is that these were intended to feed a product, a visualization product called Tableau, which is kind of like a SQL database in its own right, but it connects to and imports and locally caches and live connects to data sources from all over, and allows you to create all these wonderful visualizations against it for daily reports and such. And so I proceeded with CSV files, sort of optimistic from the stuff that I had read, that it was all going to pull together and work as I had planned, and it did to an extent. But the problem is that Tableau doesn't do its scheduled daily pulls and refreshes against CSV files easily. There's apparently some way to do it with a product called Microsoft Jet, which is a SQL engine behind SQL Server and SQL Desktop and all their other various SQL products. But I don't have a high level of assurance that if I relied on that it would be able to be set up over by the people who would be taking this work over from me. So I had to do all the mechanics or moving parts of making these data pulls accessible to Tableau, and there were a few ways to go about doing this. I could actually choose whatever database type Tableau is able to connect to, install a local instance of that database, choosing a free and open source one, and then moving the CSV files into those tables in that database on a scheduled basis, or make my script that generates the data write it into the database directly instead of to CSV files first, which is always a possibility in the future because that is quite powerful. But I looked at the moving parts, the daily routine, the processing overhead, and I was like, hey, it's already in a perfectly, capable tabular format. And I know that there's a way to do it Tableau side with Microsoft Jet. Shouldn't there be a way to do it database side with free and open source software, since I'm making the choice of database anyway? Now it happens to be that the original data pull is against Amazon Redshift, which is a fork of the PostgreSQL, or Postgres, everyone knows it as, project from the free and open source community that goes way back. I remember one of my previous employers, Scala, using it for one of their server product databases. I guess it must have been 2001, 2002, or even earlier. And I was on SQL Server at the time, and I had just embarked on, or was just embarking on, a series of job switches. And it's hard to stay SQL Server based when you're switching jobs because of licensing issues. Yeah, SQL Server desktop, okay. For some personal development work, fine. But the second you want to do anything that puts stuff out on the web, you either have to pay lots of money or you're violating license agreements. So that was another thing that really drove me off of the active server page system, and not take up the .NET system that Microsoft was trying to corral everyone along to at the time. So I really resisted the Microsoft machine upgrade cycle then, but I did not reposition myself onto another database because Oracle had acquired MySQL at around that time, and I had no interest in trading one corporate IT overlord for another. And I had done a little research and saw that a perfectly good NoSQL product called Berkeley DB was acquired by Oracle many years ago. And how many of you have heard of that today? And NoSQL is just becoming a discovered thing, even though it's been around in prior forms for ages and ages, one of which, the more leading ones, was acquired by Oracle and silenced. So what does one do? And I had put aside this thing that I knew existed called Postgres because I thought it was just a free and open source knockoff of a prior product I knew that was based on a once very popular btrieve database called Progress. And this was Postgres, so I figured Postgres was just a knockoff of plain vanilla Progress, and I wasn't too excited. But as my investigation led me back to looking at it as one of the database possibilities that I choose for creating a data source for Tableau, I discovered foreign data wrappers, which are the ability to essentially just create a config file or a create table file that connects to an outside source. So even though you have to define the table can completely live elsewhere. And in this case, CSV files sitting in the very same Dropbox location that I had been using so far. So you see this project coming together. I continue working exactly like I had been working, allowing a system to update CSV files and then to deposit those CSV files into a Dropbox location, which will be file system accessible to the person I'm working with at the other side of the country. He in San Francisco is going to be able to access files that me here in New York are generating. And that's pretty cool in itself. That's how we were trading data before. But now those very same tables are going to be live connected to the data source as the data source through foreign data wrappers of Postgres, in order to be instantaneously accessible as a database connection using connection strings, similar to what people know as ODBC. There's different protocols to connect to different database systems, and I'll be able to let my counterpart in San Francisco connect to those CSV files through a Postgres database connection. And say there's a problem, he could load the files in Dropbox, do an edit, and I believe, if I'm lucky, wait a few moments, and that change should be reflected right there in the database feed, as if they were relational database tables in the proprietary format that's usually kept on the hard drive and in memory by the database. So it's a pretty remarkable capability, and I'm learning that that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Postgres capabilities. It's pretty awesome, to tell you the truth. It's way more than I expected to be there, with a much smaller software footprint than I expected too. So PostgreSQL is one of my new favorite things, and I will be filling I guess what you'd call enterprise capable SQL software, server software, back into my repertoire, which had been conspicuously missing for many years while I focused on avoiding persistent large data or connecting to APIs and dropping it somewhere else so that I didn't have to worry about it. Or storing it local with such easy things as a Python shelf connected to a dictionary, which is a perfectly good database. That's still probably going to be my first line of defense for most things that have to be persistent across sessions and don't need a lot of database capabilities as far in the SQL sense, like joins and stuff. And my second line of defense will probably be SQLite through SQL Alchemy and maybe even still Google Spreadsheets through GSpread. Then my third line of defense, definitely Postgres. And I'm glad I'm learning it because I'll be one of the resources in the company that will be able to be tapped on general Postgres issues in the future, which are sure to arise considering the Amazon Redshift product. So pretty psyched. And I'm going in to put the finishing touches on a project that I began last week that I thought was going to be just choose a database, make a data source, publish to my friends, but it turned out to be a little bit more because I had to become a little bit of a Postgres sysadmin. Yep, that's it. How to figure out all the nuances of permissions, where to put files, how to make the create table statement, trigger it off, make my system accessible through, the auto config 0 conf bonjour something.local system, so that makes every computer pretty much on your local network easy, address accessible, as if it were a web address, but it all ends in .local. So I did that experiment, made sure my counterpart could reach it from his desktop in San Francisco on Friday before I left work. Actually, while I was leaving, while I was walking out the door, he answered me. So that was my success assured moment. So I'm coming back to work now after a success assured moment on Friday. I live for that sort of thing. I love the fact that I know today I'm going to be able to bank success. And shooting this video, I guess, because that energy that I feel inside of me is like, part of like this book I'm intending to write, part of the message I'm trying to communicate, where, you can love what you do, even if on the surface it sounds boring. Sometimes things that sound boring on the surface are actually the most interesting, that give you the most power and capability in life, as does being able to control all things, information system related, right down to installing a database and dealing with different type of connection scenarios between your database and the real world. So anyway, rambled on long enough. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon. And don't forget to subscribe.